lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm bringing you my wrap up for February. So we're going to start with the non-fiction books I read in order that I read them, and then I'm going to talk about the fiction books. If I remember at time of editing and posting, I will leave a timestamp down below for when the fiction starts. So if you're not a fan of non-fiction, you can just jump to the fiction books. And it was a fairly even spread between the two. I think I've got like 6 or 7 of each, so yeah, it should be around the halfway mark. The first book I technically actually finished in January, but I finished it on the very last day and I'd already filmed my wrap up, and that is Dirty River, A Queer Femme of Colour Dreaming Her Way Home by Leah, Laksmi, Piepzna-Samarasinha. So this is an autobiography of Leah, and it is about her time travelling. She is, as it says, is a queer femme of colour. She's also disabled, and it's kind of a strange combination of like vignettes and kind of stream of consciousness, some poems, some essays that sort of talk about her life in general. Honestly, I didn't think it was particularly successful. It's the kind of book that has these sort of raw flashes of emotional brilliance that were wrapped up in a very like repetitive, clunky, frankly poorly edited sort of wrapping around it. I think the book is most powerful when it talks about her experiences with extreme poverty and also experiences as being somebody who is disabled. I believe it's chronic pain that she deals with. So those moments were definitely the more interesting and more kind of powerful ones for me, but there was all sorts of messy stuff kind of around it that just didn't particularly appeal. I think if you're a fan of memoir in general, you might like this one a little bit more than me. I'm not somebody who overly likes memoir. It does have to be something particularly strong for me to really enjoy it. So it was an interesting reading experience in the sense that I'm glad I have read it, but it wasn't particularly enjoyable at any point. The next non-fiction book that I finished, I was chipping away at for nearly 3 months, and that was A Brief History of Mathematical Thought by Heaton. This, as the title suggests, is looking at the key concepts of mathematics and where they came from throughout history. It's the kind of book that really sort of highlights for me sort of both the joy and difficulty of reading non-fiction. Often when you're reading non-fiction about a specific kind of topic rather than somebody's life, there are going to be aspects of it where you don't really understand what's going on because you don't have kind of the background information, and no more was this really relevant than with this particular book because my background in mathematics is fairly weak. I haven't studied maths since GCSE level. I was fairly good back then, but I don't consider myself to be somebody who's like particularly mathematically literate. I've done a history of mathematics course in the past and really enjoyed it, and I did touch on some of the philosophy of mathematics at university, which this book does go into a little bit as well as logical form, which is something that is a crossover between mathematics and philosophy. So there were a few chapters of this where I felt more comfortable than others. Generally, I really enjoyed it. I think it did pretty well at being fairly accessible for beginners. It's hard to really know with something like this because I don't really believe that there is a standard of common knowledge that everybody has. So I liked it, and I think that the bit at the back where it kind of talks about where you can go on to if you're interested in different areas that it talks about was really cool. And I definitely liked the historical elements a lot more when we were talking about kind of how these things were invented / discovered and sort of what impacts various mathematical ideas have had on society as a whole and sort of who discovered them, rather than just the nitty-gritty of some of the like pure raw mathematics, which there were chunks of it that did go over my head. But I think that that's perfectly okay in a non-fiction, and I know that the next maths book that I read there will be things that will click in place a bit more, and I will kind of have those like lovely sort of puzzle piece slotting into place moments, thinking back to this book and being like, oh, that's what that was on about. And let's put it this way, when I was reading this book I went out and bought 2 more books on mathematics, so it's sparked something that I'm really interested in. It definitely didn't kill it for me, so I think that that is also a really good mark of a non-fiction book. The next book that I read in non-fiction I also didn't particularly enjoy. Not that I didn't enjoy the maths one, you know what I mean. This is Bluestockings, The Remarkable Story of the First Woman to Fight for an Education by Jane Robinson. And it's not the remarkable story of the first woman to fight for an education at all. It is actually just a series of kind of diary entries, snippets, general musings of some of the first women who went to mainly Oxbridge and then some of the other like red brick universities in the UK. It doesn't really tell you much about how the fight for education came about or exactly who the first women were. It's just, like I said, like these sort of very mundane in the life of stories of like what was it like to be a student, what were the kind of responses to some of the male students, what was the responses to some of the teachers, when were the colleges, like the all girls colleges first founded, how did, like, when were they first awarded degrees and things like that, but none of the like how and none of the kind of social stuff. And I think this is really an example of what happens when somebody who doesn't have a background in like academic history attempts to write a history book. Jane Robinson studied English, and like you can like, it's a good narrative, but it's not particularly historically strong. It was very messy and it really just didn't do what I was looking for. Bluestockings is actually a term for a particular group of individuals who are particularly academic, which included a collection of women in, I think, the Victorian era. So I was hoping that the book would talk about them, not specifically just about using this as almost like a slang term to refer to women who are bookishly inclined in the kind of turn of the century as such. So yeah, a bit of a letdown, but it was a quick read. We now come to two that were infinitely more powerful and infinitely more enjoyable, and of course one of them is going to be about dinosaurs. It's Dinosaurs Rediscovered by Michael J. Benton. This was great. It was on my 5-star predictions list. Of course it got 5 stars. I love dinosaurs. Well documented fact around here. If you're new, hey, I'm a dino gal. This is talking specifically about how the scientific revolution rewrote history. Specifically, it's looking about some of the very, very recent advancements within science and how they've changed what was a little bit more of kind of speculation and natural history into more of a rigorous hard science paleontological study, and how we can really know and prove things about the stuff that was happening on our planet however many million years ago. It's talking about things like computing power and statistical analysis, and how it can be used to understand family trees, and how it can then be used to understand how kind of evolution works. It talks about all sorts of really cool scanning imagery that we have going on, including as well some new advances where we can actually potentially put forward some ideas of what colours certain dinosaurs were due to the shapes of pigments. It's also looking about how paleontology interacts with biology and kind of zoology in general, and how we can use various living creatures today to try and make inferences back about what was happening in prehistoric times. It was awesome. It's great. It is very much about the study of paleontology rather than specifically information about the dinosaurs as such. So it's looking more about how people have found out various things rather than necessarily fully just what they found out. I loved it. It's not particularly an intro book, but it is definitely the most up to date at the moment with what is going on within paleontology. So if you have a bit of a background about dinosaurs, this one's great. And if you are really looking for that most like cutting edge stuff, this is definitely where you want to go. It's also got tons of really nice pictures in it, like great pictures. Just kind of wanted to put that out there. So I deeply enjoyed it, but of course I did. Like, it's a dinosaur book. And then one that was actually on an old 5-star predictions list, which typically, as soon as I said like I was going to abandon that list, of course I read one of the books that I didn't bother to get around to when that list was still active, and that is Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny by Kate Manne. This was exactly what I wanted from this book going into it. I was really looking for a feminist book that was far more like rigorously academic in character, rather than using a lot of the anecdotal, more like sociological evidence that's often out there. And this book does exactly that, which means because it is really academic in places, a lot of the like negative book reviews on Goodreads were basically saying that it was dense and impenetrable, and I can totally see where they are coming from. It is one that you do need to have a bit of a background in philosophy or a willingness to Google a lot of terms. You could totally just do that instead to fully understand what's going on. Basically, Kate Manne is putting forward the argument that misogyny is distinct from sexism, where sexism is more of like a way of looking at the world and kind of making a scientific distinction between the two sexes. Instead, the two sexes, you know what I mean. Instead, Kate Manne is arguing that misogyny is more of a moralistic movement that is looking at kind of almost like the police force of the kind of sexist patriarchy, which is looking to shame and shun women who dare to break outside of kind of standard gender norms, and that it has far more of an ethical and like moral basis to it, rather than just kind of a sort of making distinctions and assumptions on people based on their sex. It's very intense. It has a lot of different subtitles, but it was incredibly powerful and really, really interesting, and exactly what I was looking for. And it pulled in all sorts of stuff about domestic abuse, about various cases that have happened out there recently, about kind of some of the shootings that have gone on. It just generally was a really wonderful read. Okay, we're now going to talk about the fiction that I read. I did DNF 2 that I'll talk about at the very end, but the first one that I finished was Bloodchild and Other Stories by Octavia E. Butler. This was great. It's a collection of short stories, as it says in the title. I'm not normally a huge fan of short stories. I find them very hit and miss for me, but I actually really enjoyed this one, and I think I enjoyed more of the short stories than didn't. I especially like some of the really early sci-fi ones. Bloodchild, the titular short story, was super creepy and super weird, and has like a lot of like body horror, body gore kind of stuff going on. A few of them had that, and I just thought that they were gruesome and disgusting and amazing in equal measure. Octavia E. Butler does some really fun stuff with kind of playing with your assumptions about sort of what genders should do, and yeah, I deeply enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying my kind of like reading of her entire back catalogue for the most part. We'll get to one that I haven't enjoyed a bit later. Then I read the Rosewater Insurrection by Tade Thomspon. This is book 2 of the Rosewater trilogy. So the Rosewater trilogy is kind of a sci-fi set in Nigeria, I think like loosely 50 or 60 years into the future, and it's basically where an alien biodome has appeared, and it can heal people. It sort of has effects on people who have got these latent psychic powers. It's playing around with a lot of stuff to do with like spores and fungal things and plants. It's really good fun and creepy. Book 1 focuses on Caro, I think his name is. I'm really bad with character names, and kind of him working for like a almost like semi-secret government agency with his psychic abilities. Book 2 is obviously following on from book 1, and I don't want to fully talk about what's going on in it because I don't want to spoil anything from book 1, but what I will say is we get to explore a lot more of some of the secondary characters. We get a lot more different points of view, which I really enjoyed. Some of them felt slightly unnecessary. We veered off a little bit, which is what I don't enjoy with multiple POV ones. But for the most part I really liked all of them, and I also thought that it was a little bit more powerful because it went a bit more linear in fashion in terms of its kind of timeline. The book 1 jumps around a lot and I found it quite confusing, whereas book 2 was a lot kind of more straight, which meant that I could really enjoy the world building and sort of really sink into this world a bit more because I wasn't trying to pay attention to like, wait, when did these events occur? I like where it's going. I'm really excited for book 3. It's a book 2. I love book 2s of trilogy. I always think that they're the best because you've got all the preamble set up, but you can just like snuggle down into the world and like really enjoy what's going on in it. But yeah, I just thought this was really, really cool. I missed some because I don't have physical copies of them. So let's talk about those that I read as well. Otherwise I'm going to get to the end and get really confused. I listened to Red Clocks by Leni Zumas. This was fantastic. It is kind of a dystopian future where it's set in America, and basically, oh, what was it? It's like abortion rights have been completely removed, IVF has been completely removed. Essentially, it's considered that life happens at conception, and anything that causes the death of a like fertilized egg is considered completely out. And it's following 5 different women and kind of their interactions with motherhood and with kind of bumping against this law. It sets up this law as kind of a premise in the background, and that has definitely impacts on these women's lives, but really it's about their lives rather than anything kind of big and political afterwards. It's not like they're kind of doing an uprising or anything like that. It's really just looking at how they are going to go about their lives and sort of their interactions with the concept of motherhood throughout it. I was a little bit unbothered at the beginning, but as it kind of progressed, it got more and more powerful, and it definitely really hooked me in. One thing that I think didn't help with that is when you're in the, like, it's following these 5 different POVs, and when you're in the head of the particular person, it doesn't refer to them by name, it refers to them by like a title. So you have like the biographer, and like the school teacher or something was maybe one of them, and I found that really annoying because these women like meet each other, and by doing so use their actual names. So given that you then have to kind of piece together like, oh, the biographer is that person and this one's this person, and I just don't think it added anything. I think it was a layer of confusion that like once you could have just got rid of it and it would have been completely fine. I do love the interconnectedness and how their lives ended up interacting, and I just thought that it was a really like beautiful, heartwarming, touching, interesting exploration in the different ways that women can interact with the concept of being a mother and the concept of like pregnancy as a whole. So yeah, I was genuinely quite surprised by this one. I was a little bit apprehensive going in, and it definitely took me a little while to ease into it, but once I did, I really enjoyed it. One that I was less bothered by was The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is a horror novella, and apparently it's kind of a bit of a retelling of the Lovecraft Cthulhu myth or story. I don't think it's a myth. I've not read Lovecraft's Cthulhu. I've read one Lovecraft. I hated it. I thought it was shit. I don't want to read any more from him. And apparently, like, Lovecraft has a lot of racist undertones apparently, so this was like a reimagining it from a black author with some like with a black main character. And I just think I missed bits of what he was doing because I don't know the original text. Generally, as a horror book, I thought it was kind of cool. Like, the horror novella, it was fun, it did some interesting things, but like, I feel like I got a very surface level understanding of it, and I feel like it would have been better had I known what it was kind of referencing back to. I do want to try some more Victor LaValle though, because I can definitely see a lot of very strong craft in that and in his writing, and I think I would do better with one of his books that isn't based off of a source material that I know literally nothing about. I know nothing about Cthulhu, maybe a tentacle monster guy. Is that a kraken? Am I getting Cthulhus and krakens confused? I know nothing. Anyway, so let's move on, shall we? The next two books that I read was the Green Man duology by Emily Tesh. This is two like novellas that I just read back to back to basically make a full story. And this is the Green Man myth, which again I know nothing about, and I think again I would have appreciated it a little bit more had I known a little bit more. But I really enjoyed the series, especially book one, because it's this really beautiful gay romance between this like forest spirit, this green man, this kind of man almost made of trees as such, who lives in this forest attached to this particular like manor house, and then the kind of gentleman who owns the manor house, who kind of goes out there and ends up meeting him, and they kind of end up building this very like slow burn romance. And then book two continues on with something slightly different that I don't want to ruin for anybody, but it really reminded me of This Is How to Lose the Time War, and that real sort of lush, very descriptive, kind of throwing in at the deep end, not fully explaining world building. I just kind of wish there'd been a bit more to it, which to be honest is probably how I feel about the Ballad of Black Tom, and how I feel about so many novellas in general. Is I just, especially like a fantasy or a horror novella where I'm like, or a sci-fi novella where I'm like, there's so much world building that I want you to do, and you don't have the space to, because you've got a novella and you have to cram characters and plot into it as well. And I really wanted to be able to explore their relationship a bit more, and I wanted to explore the world a bit more, and the big bad who came up at the end, I wanted a bit more from that, and kind of the sort of vaguely not quite love triangle thing that ended up developing. And like, it was beautiful and rich and organic and incredible, and like I wanted to hang out a bit more in the world, which was why I then immediately bought book two. But book two for me wasn't quite as strong, and it didn't really do what I wanted it to do. So I really enjoyed it in the sense that I think I gave it like a 9 out of 10 or a 5 stars, or might have marked it as a favourite. Like, definitely deeply enjoyed, but I just want more from novellas. I always do. I don't feel like my reviews are very good today. I'm a bit rambly, aren't I? Anyway, moving on. Next one. I read Herland and the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Yeah, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Herland is great, actually. I really enjoyed it. Herland is about 3 Victorian, or like American but Victorian kind of time period explorers who find like a pocket of like an ancient civilization of just women, like in sort of an Amazonian rainforest, and it is like their interactions being captured by these women, and then like learning how this society exists. And it was written in like the very early 1900s, and it's a perfect example of like the various different sort of waves and iterations of feminism and kind of conceptions of like women and what equality would look like, because it's ideas of what a society entirely built of women would be like is very much based on the concepts of like compassion, caring, motherhood is a really big deal in this, and like a kind of collective motherhood is a really big deal for these women. And the way that they understand like interacting within the world is always through a lens of like empathy and kindness and like not doing harm, which I do think is really interesting. I also think it was really interesting of Perkins Gilman to tell the story through the eyes of a man walking into this world, and in doing so there's like the 3 men who kind of sit on the full spectrum of like revering women but still not treating them as human, very much objectifying women and therefore not treating them as human, and then kind of our main narrator who attempts to sit in the middle but still bumps into his own prejudices. And it was just generally really interesting. So I definitely recommend that one. The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story in it about a woman who is bedbound, based on she's pregnant, and like I don't think the pregnancy is going very well, and she's bedbound, and it's kind of about her experiences slowly losing her grip on reality in this bedbound in this old manor house. I thought it was cool, but again, it's a short story. I want more from it. I always do. My perfect book is really like 300 to 400 pages, and I think if it's anything shorter than that, sometimes I'm a bit like, I want more. But yeah, generally I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed Herland way more than I was expecting to. I bought this to read The Yellow Wallpaper, and then was like really pleasantly surprised by Herland. I read Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. This was weird. This was really weird. It's been a weird reading month. A good reading month. I've enjoyed the reading experience of nearly everything, even if I am being very critical in my reviews right now. I do just want to put that out there. generally I enjoyed my reading in February. Most of these, even if I'm being mean about them, got like an 8 out of 10. Just FYI. This one didn't. This one got a 6 out of 10. This one was weird. So Helen Oyeyemi does frankly strange stuff often. This one is about the kind of idea of gingerbread existing within like the fairy tale kind of concept. So there's like a sort of parallel university type thing where there's all sorts of references to fairy tales. A girl is sick and tries to commit suicide at the beginning. I don't really know what happened. There's like a demony girl at one point who appears. I didn't get it. I don't often get Helen Oyeyemi. This is the 3rd book of hers I've read. I've given one a 1 star, one a 5 star, now this one a 3 star. I think I might just need to abandon this author. I don't think I fully understand it. It's rich, it's lush, she's got a lovely writing style, and like, if you don't mind kind of pottering along having no real idea what's going on, then that's completely fine. And like, maybe you'll read it and you will get what's going on. But for me, it just kind of went over my head and I didn't really know what the point was at the end. And there were bits of it that I wanted to explore further. And then we veered off really weirdly at a tangent. And I think it's telling the tale of who is this girl's father. I think that's the underlying message, and it's like a family legacy thing, but it's wrapped up in a lot of very weird stuff. And I think I couldn't get past the wrapping of the weird. So yeah, Helen Oyeyemi. And then the last book that I finished is Defy the Worlds by Claudia Gray. This was indeed on my March TBR. I've done that thing again where I start a book before it's technically the end of the month, and then I finish it before we even hit the month that its TBR was supposed to be in, but that's okay. This is book 2 of the Constellation trilogy, I believe, which is a YA space opera where book 1 was focused on... So the world is like Earth keeps draining all of its resources, so it keeps colonizing other planets, basically to use up their resources and spread out this like sprawling, exploding population. And there's one planet that refuses to give out, which is called Genesis, and the big thing that they disagree with is Earth has also made loads of advancements with artificial intelligence, and Genesis doesn't want anything to do with it. So it's this big battle that's been going on for literal decades between these two planets, and essentially book 1 focuses on the fighter from one of the planets, Noemi, who meets this artificial intelligence program, Abel, who has a soul and is basically distinct from all the other artificial intelligence programs, and it's about their journey together and them kind of growing and falling in love together. So it's kind of a space opera romance at its heart. Book 2 is following on obviously from book 1. A lot of things happen, and it kind of did a similar format where I was like, I really like the world, I like the characters, we're hanging out, oh it's getting a little bit repetitive, maybe I'm getting a bit bored, and then at the 60% mark it throws in a really big twist and you're like, oh damn, this is good again. So like, I really like the series. I like the conversations and like the questions it's throwing up about artificial intelligence and what does it mean to be a person. I love that kind of stuff. I love AI conversations. I think they're really cool in sci-fi. It talks about kind of like means to justify the ends and like greater good stuff. If you've seen the movie Serenity, you know, the Joss Whedon one off of the Firefly series, it's kind of doing some similar things to that, which I really liked in book 2. And just generally, I had a really good time. You know, you're like, I like the world, I like the characters, I like hanging out with all these people, and I'm here for it. I'm loving the vibes. So it was one of the best reads I think of the entire month, and I definitely want to finish the trilogy before the end of the year, but I want to give myself a bit of space from it so that I can come back to it and just like remember how much I love these characters again. So those are all the books I read. My 2 DNFs, one of them was Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. It's a vampire book, but the undead immortal is trapped in a 10-year-old's body, and within 20 pages one of the guys had already had consensual sex with the 10-year-old, which is not a statement one should ever make about a book. And maybe it's doing something interesting with this whole Alita thing, but I don't want to read that, so I abandoned it because no, I don't ever want to read a sex scene that includes a 10-year-old, regardless of what the author's going to do with it later. Personal preference, just not my thing. And then I also was listening to Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo, and this one I couldn't get along with any of the characters. They were all quite unlikable to me, and the main guy had, yeah, you're just like, I don't want to hang out with any of you, and I'm not enjoying this. I have a Goodreads review where I kind of articulate that a bit better, which I'll link down below if I remember, but yeah, I just walked away from it. It's one I might come back to at some point in the future, but both of them were just like, this isn't what I want to be doing. And you know, you put down a book and then you don't pick it up for like several weeks because you just don't really want to be experiencing it, and you're like, oh, maybe tomorrow I'll be in the mood for it, and then it keeps just not happening. And then at some point, for me anyway, I have to be like, you're never going to be in the mood for this. You don't actually want to read this. You should DNF it and move on, because it's bogging down the rest of your reading and it's making you feel crappy about the concept of reading. Like, it's going to throw you into a slump if you let this continue. So I just walked away from both of them and was like, nope, I'm just bleh, done. Which I'm going to try and do a bit more. I Let Emma by Jane Austen drag me down. We're not doing that again. So yeah, so that's it from me. Ooh, I'm just knocking stuff over now. Bit of a rambly one, bit of a fun one. I don't really know how meaningful a lot of those reviews were. I'm sorry in advance if they weren't great. In advance, it's not post hoc if they weren't great. My bad. I'm just gonna go. My random question of the day that I forgot to do in the last video is if you could only eat one type of potato for the rest of your life, what type of potato would it be? I think mine would be hash browns, because I love them. Have a wonderful reading week. I'll chat to you soon.